Hey guys, alright, we're back. So this time we did another Homebrew chapter. This time I created it again. But this time it's going to be the Immortal Swords. And the Immortal Swords I took mostly inspiration from just feudal Japan. But there's a lot of differences. We're going to go over that. So besides that, strap your butts in. I know a lot of Japanese people might be a little upset because I probably got some stuff wrong, but that's totally fine. This is, again, just another example chapter I made where, just like the Brothers of Flesh that I made like last year, to me, it's average. It's got like enough details for me to immerse myself into the characters, but it's not quite as fleshed out or doesn't make a lot of sense in some areas. But it's a lot better than most of the shit that you guys send me, so hey, we're making progress. Alright, so let's begin. Alrighty, the Immortal Swords. Space Marine Homebrew chapter. Homeworld, we got Orichala. Doesn't explain anything about the world, just Orichala, okay. Colors, white is the primary color with bright red secondary. Okay, interesting. Emblem, bright white flower with sword in the middle. Okay, that's this, I'm assuming. Hell yeah. Specialty, sword combat and planet rulers. Okay, let's go. Warcry, honor, now and forever. Okay, we got it. The numbers, roughly 3,000 Astartes with Astra Militarum force of 100,000 per company accompanying them at all times. Wow. I wonder why that is. But don't worry, we're going to get to it. Descendants of the White Scars. Okay, so we know where their home chapter is. And looking at it, I didn't put in why it is that the other pauldron is white and the other one's red. But the gloves are red, the bright red or pink, whatever. Doesn't matter. The knees and the feet. The backpack's white, golden little Aquila, white. Okay. Again, to me this is average, but to you guys this may be like amazing. Founded in the 4th founding, this chapter was meant, along with several others, to bolster the Imperium after the events known as the Beast. This chapter lies within the veiled region of Segmentum Tempestus. Being so far removed from most affairs, it is no wonder why no one has heard or seen this chapter until as of late, with the Indomitus Crusade. The Immortal Swords usually are busy, whether that be slaying orcs and Necron foes, or restructuring and enlightening human colonies within their grasp. Interesting. The 4th founding. That is not a typical founding that people usually select. I like it. That's like a 32nd millennium. Again, this is mine. I know I'm kind of sucking my own dick here, but hey, I like the ideas that I go with, and I think you guys should too. This chapter specializes in swords and ruling human colonies. Hey, just like we said all the way at the top. What do you know, Freezer? Pat on the back. Being descendants of Jagatai Khan, this chapter holds honor and personal integrity above all. The differences between the Immortal Swords and the White Scars is vast, and would be easier to just point out their similarities. To start with, honor is sacred, and the White Scars on one's body... I'm sorry, not White Scars. And scars on one's body are significant to their soul, and claiming that the Emperor is not a god. Okay, so these are the similarities. Honor is important, scars on one's body are significant to their soul, and claiming that the Emperor is not a god. Okay. Besides that, everything else is massively different. Yep, I'd pretty much assume so. The lack of bikes is from their history, as planetary administrators and planetary governors. They focus on saving the mechanical forges for their guardsmen and fleet building. These Space Marines typically concern themselves with governance and securing territory, ensuring that wherever they go, and whatever planet they stumble upon, that they will enlighten it and create a planet that is better than when they arrived. Their main method of governance is through a clan-based system, where cities and hives have divided into clans/districts, and their representatives come to the open sitting ground of their governor, typically a veteran of the chapter who has led a Space Marine company for over 100 years. These governors are typically master philosophers, able to look at life and empathize with any who sit next to them. This chapter views wisdom and empathy as ultimate tools of governance. Using their wisdom and ability to understand their subjects, planets governed by the immortal swords are relatively peaceful. Crime may still be rampant, but not nearly as bad as the typical hive city, which is an achievement in of itself. When it comes to governance, they view that wanton slaughter of populace is a sign of poor leadership. Hence their disdain for inquisitors, viewing them as all knowledge with zero spirit. A general who can lead by force will soon be led to fight on his own. I like these little quotes that I made. So, what have we learned so far? They do not use motorcycles like the White Scars. They instead build fleets and guard regiments, which is interesting. They're usually more concerned with securing territory rather than conquering territory, and they're more concerned about how their planets function, is so far what we've gathered from what we've learned. And we've also learned a little bit on how they do things. It doesn't go in exact detail here how the hives are divided into clans or what they do, but it is stated that they all come to this open sitting ground of their governor. This could probably be interpreted as like in the wild or just simply on some sort of building rooftop. Basically somewhere that's more like a campfire, I would assume. It even says what kind of people usually are running these planets. It's usually veterans of the chapter who ran a marine company for over 100 years. Interesting. Some of the planetary governors of the Immortal Swords have brought great shame onto themselves from failure to improve their planets. Some of these worlds are tomb worlds, or dead worlds, utterly incapable of harboring life and therefore unable to be enlightened. This all ties back to the top where he says they fight Necrons. He is in me. And we have to know that Necrons usually do not live on worlds that are thriving with life. Usually those worlds are just dead to their very core. Like on a molecular level, they are dead. These Space Marines who fail must take a circle-shaped hot iron and brand their wrist. Each failure brings about another circle that has to be linked with the previous circle. The permanent scars are viewed with both honor and disdain depending on the philosophy of the Space Marine in question. To some, it shows as a failure, a deep weight one must carry on their soul forever. To others, it shows progress, that while they have failed, they have risen above their failure and become more wise for it. The very chapter master himself has so many circles imprinted on his arms that it looks like iron chains wrapped around both forearms. Holy shit. That is a lot of circles. It's a lot. Some of the more elite of the chapter view him with disgust at his failures. Others view him as the wisest man alive, as he carries the marks of over 100 failed worlds, yet live to tell about it. Damn. Imagine that. You're the chapter master and people go, you harbor the death of 1,000 worlds. Therefore, you're probably the wisest amongst us. Like, damn, that's crazy. If a Space Marine does enlighten a world and does achieve success, then typically they will have the option to leave the planet to a younger Marine in order to teach them how administration works, while the veteran goes out and pursues another world he can conquer. Or he stays, feeling that his work is yet to be done, and could elevate himself in his position, possibly becoming chapter master himself. Interesting. So from here we learn that they give younger Space Marines planets, not really as owners, but really just to teach them how administration works while they go out and pursue conquest. Or they stay, and that's how you elevate yourself in the chapters, by staying on a planet and keep working at it. After all, the feeling that work is yet to be done does kind of tie in with the whole philosophy and stuff, and the art and such. So yeah, this makes a little bit of sense. The way this chapter conducts itself is very much similar in style to the Black Templars and Custodes. Interesting. I wonder what they mean by that. The chapter master is the ultimate figurehead who can call upon the whole chapter, but it's the Space Marines' choice whether they answer that call or deem it not important enough compared to their current prerogative. Interesting. Something I think a lot of people tend to forget is that the Black Templars and the Custodes, they basically run like this, where the leader can say, hey, we should fight whatever target, but ultimately it's up to the individual to say, I don't respect you enough, so I'm not going to answer, or what I'm dealing with right now is far more important in my mind than what it is that you're saying is important. So that's interesting. When a company is formed, it is known as a confederation. These confederations go by several names, typically more poetic, that describe their purpose for the confederation. Example would be Life Through Death, a confederation that is set against Necrons. Another example would be Closer of Mauls, a confederation set out to kill greenskins or stop a Wog. These confederations are typically summoned by the planetary governor, where he reaches out to fellow immortal swords and makes his case for why they should put their resources together against whatever foe he's decided on. Some of these require no debate, as the respect shared amongst the brethren, or the dire need to kill the target is good enough for them to pit their guardsmen and ships together in a confederation. The Space Marines themselves, who are not planetary governors, typically have small bands they are in, and can stop their travels upon receiving transmission for Confederation and decide to join. From there, all the Space Marines who attend the Confederation decide amongst themselves, in an orderly vote around a campfire, who should lead the Confederation. It is typically the one who is most respected but also most enlightened. Interesting. So from here, we've learned a lot about how these guys mobilize, how these guys organize themselves, and we can see right away that they don't have companies. So they're probably a lot like the Black Templars and the Custodes, where they don't wear company markings. It's not stated, I wish it was, but it could be implied that, yeah, they probably don't do that. And that they probably just take part in multiple campaigns and gain something out of that, which is probably just respect. Again, to me, this is average. It doesn't have enough details. Still good, though. Really good details. When conducting themselves in battle, they are most admired by the Adeptus Ministorum, for they never call upon the Imperium at large for aid. They instead create their own resources, using their own tanks, and using their own men and women. They still pay the Imperial tithe. Ooh, that's a good one. He added that detail in. He is in me. But they govern so well that they still have enough resources to grow their own fleets and guardsmen. Utilizing their own war efforts, their conduct in battle is not typical when dealing with guardsmen. Instead of trenches and forts, they typically have widespread guardsmen, assaulting all positions an enemy has and using only Space Marines when hitting specific targets of importance. This means that most of their guardsmen are supplied with chimeras for rapid deployment on the battlefield and Leman Russ tanks for firepower. Very rarely will they deploy anything heavier or lighter than those two vehicles. Okay, so that means that you'll probably not see a Sentinel. It's a little bit lighter than a Chimera, and you probably wouldn't see something like a Bane Blade. But this is interesting so far. So the way they fight is truly kind of like a White Scars, but instead of a chapter in Space Marines, they're doing the entire guardsman. So you just have like over 100,000 guardsmen descend on a planet, rapidly deploying, lasers flying, fighting whatever their target is, and they're not doing it in a standard fashion, like building trenches, building artillery. No, they don't do that. And the reason why is, as stated, they're using their own resources. They're not calling upon the Adeptus Ministorum. So these are weapons that they're making and vehicles they're making. So it's implied, it's not stated, that they own a few hive worlds that are capable of manufacturing this. Interesting. Especially what we know in the beginning, where we say Tempestus Segmentum, the Veiled Region, or Segmentum Tempestus, my bad. I'm a little dyslexic, it seems. So we know that they live in a very weird area of space. Very little is known about it. It's riddled with orcs and necrons, and the way they fight is with their own resources and tools at their disposal. Very independent chapters so far. For Space Marines, they must travel on foot or ride on top of guardsmen's vehicles in battle. This is viewed as relying on the greatest weapon a person has, which is their own body. Usually when engaged on defense, walls are not typically seen. Instead, makeshift barriers are made, and typically artificial hills created so that guardsmen and Space Marines are fighting from the top down onto their enemies, who must climb upwards. If the fighting is too dangerous, usually the hill will be abandoned but layered with explosives. He who protects everything loses everything. This is actually a quote from the Book of War, Sun Tzu. When it comes to combat, use of a bolter is rare and typically reserved for when needed. Instead, the Space Marines of this chapter prefer their two-handed katanas, relying on their own strength and skill to outclass any enemy. When it comes to making Space Marines, the individual planets have their own training grounds, but the homeworld of Orichala has the best academy, and typically recruits would be sent there for training, whether that is for their entire phase as a Space Marine, or whether it's just for a few years. During the selection process, kids are typically offered to their planetary governors voluntarily, as the families receive great honor in their communities for their sacrifice, and should their child become a full-fledged Space Marine, then the family will be notified that their blood is of great stock, and will therefore receive benefits from the chapter if they accept a deal where they are migrated to the homeworld of Orichala and work easy lives, but must maintain 5 kids, as those 5 will be inducted into the chapter involuntarily. If they are girls, then the girls will be inducted as poets, artists, and maintenance crew, helping keep the monastery clean. Interesting. So what we just learned just now is how the Space Marines more or less conduct themselves, but also how they recruit and how they train. So if they have a few worlds that all have their own little academies and training grounds, they may decide, okay, you've learned really well here, but you will do much, much better if we ship you to Orichala for maybe a year or a few years, and then you come back and we'll finish your training here. Or it could just be, you know what, just go to Orichala, learn everything, and once you're a full-fledged Space Marine, you can choose to come back to me or whatever. That's interesting. What we also have here is we learn what the families receive by giving their child up voluntarily, and their child does become a Space Marine. So this could be kind of crazy, because I mean, if it's a lot of families and a lot of them become Space Marines, it's a lot of people migrating to Orichala. And there's not enough details here to know how exactly that works and what kind of work the family is given. But we do know they have to have 5 kids. We don't know, though, what happens if they don't maintain that, if they don't maintain the deal. And we do know that once they do have 5 kids, each child is taken involuntarily, because it's part of the deal. It's not a voluntary thing like, oh, here, I have 5 kids, here you go. No, it's like, you have a kid, I'm taking that, that's 1. You have another kid, I'm taking that, that's 2. Like, that's interesting. That's very unique. But on the flip side, they get easy lives. And we also learn what happens if you have 5 children, they're women. Well, this is what happens. They become poets, artists, maintenance crew, helping around. Wish there was more detail about the girls, like what determines them to becoming a poet versus becoming a maintenance crew, or what their life is like in the monasteries. But hey, so far it's great. During training, the young boys are taught the importance of integrity and honor. They are expected to hold their own in combat after receiving many drills, working tirelessly for 16 hours a day of non-stop fighting. As the kids are working, some may die from exhaustion. Others may be killed by training practice. It is viewed that one must hold their own and be resilient even in youth, as it shows a strong character. Maintenance of weapons and the art of sword crafting is also taught. The power of the blade is most important above all. When the kids who survive receive their first implants is when they are now broken into groups. Each group typically is 15 kids, will be assigned to a part of the world where it is wild and hostile, where their trainer teaches them hunting and foraging, showing them the wisdom of starvation and the patience needed to get food. Here is the deadliest part of training, as the planet's creatures could be dangerous, but starvation is the real killer, as their growing teenage bodies need far more nutrition than a typical human, especially with the implants that they have received. Typically, it is just one kid who graduates as they forage and fight to survive. They are also expected to spend 4 hours a day with their trainer learning philosophy and listen to stories of wisdom and poetry. This is difficult, but it shows discipline and the ability to ignore one's body to hone their spirit. This admiration for honor and seeking of wisdom leads to the youths to seek balance in both their martial styles and their mindsets. Sometimes trainers will send out trainees on quests like slaying a group of criminals or slaying a beast. If the trainee lacks spirit, then the trainer will send them instead to plow fields or help locals with their day-to-day activities. Typically, when in this phase of training, it continues on even past adulthood, as the trainee must be approved by multiple trainers to be accepted as a proper immortal sword. It's not capitalized. Some trainers are purely philosophical. Other trainers are strictly martial. When a trainee feels he has learned all he can from his teacher, he must go before him in a circle of other trainers and prove his knowledge and wisdom before them all. Interesting. So we just learned how they induct people into their order. We learned that they spend tirelessly hours working with a sword, training, fighting each other, fighting whatever. But once they've received their first implants from probably like 10 to 13 years old, they are now divided into groups, and from here, most of them are going to die because they're kind of left on their own to grow and nourish their own skills at their own pace. That's interesting. What's interesting too is that down here we put that it can lead past adulthood. So they're receiving their implants and now they're full-grown adults. And unlike other Space Marines, they're not Space Marines yet, because other chapters do it differently. To them, you have to prove yourself before a bunch of other trainers and prove to them in a circle, like, hey, I know everything this guy has to teach me. That's interesting. And then they even state here that some trainers are purely philosophical. So you could be imbalanced. You could be an amazing swordsman, but you're kind of a barbarian. You're kind of just this wild, feral human. Okay, so spend time with this guy, learn art, learn poetry, learn wisdom, and that's all you're doing. That's interesting. When a person is deemed as balanced and one with their spirit, they must undergo a ritual where they receive their Space Marine armor and their own power katana. Ooh. When they undergo dressing in their armor and claiming their katana, the Space Marine must inhale from a pipe. This pipe is laced with powerful plants that are native to Orikala, called harnishi. Harnishi is believed to be a powerful poison that, when smoked, could put a human in such a deep sleep that they never wake up. Now, while that is true, it does not have the same effect on Space Marines due to their ability to handle toxins. So when a Space Marine smokes this pipe, he undergoes a severe weakening. Once in his armor and wielding his new weapon, the Harnishi strips away all the strength the warrior once possessed. This dampening of reflexes and dampening of strength is to teach a warrior humility, but more importantly, to keep them in touch with their humanity. That, in death, they are just as human as the normal people they guard. Now they must fight in a duel against another Space Marine. This duel is not fatal, but the duel highlights how a child or a common man performs against the monsters in the stars. If the Marine wins the duel, then he is immediately declared a veteran despite the lack of combat and lack of years. But more than common, the Marine will lose. This will impart the wisdom of never looking down on soldiers below them, that while they fight an opponent much greater than Space Marines and underprepared, they still have the courage to hold their ground and fight. Hence why Space Marines of this chapter do not view humans with disdain, but instead admiration for their strong spirits. That's unique. After all, most Space Marines do not care about humanity sometimes, and some of them, they'll try to protect them, but if they see a few hundred humans die, they really don't. It doesn't bother them that much. Salamanders are the exception. But with this chapter, we see that they actually admire humans and go, wow, you're that weak? After I smoked this pipe, this Harnishi, I am as weak as you are, and you still had the courage to fight that monster that's stronger than me as a Space Marine? Wow, you must have a strong spirit. So this is where this chapter is so unique. Interesting. And after all, they are planetary governors. So here they are ruling humans, and they can admire them and understand them. Interesting. Smoking Harnishi does not stop there, though. Harnishi is typically smoked by planetary governors when conducting their business with the normal human populace, as to remind them of that fateful duel and to bring their senses down, fully immersing themselves into the role of a human governor rather than a superhuman overlord. As the Harnishi is smoked more and more, the Space Marine body starts to resist it. This leads to some veterans just getting a slight depressant effect on their moods, calming their nerves rather than stripping away their strength. but still it is a powerful tool to remind them of where they come from. Those that lose touch with their humanity lose all rights to rule it. Interesting. So, this is implying that the smoke of the Harnishi is not fatal to humans, it's only the person who inhales it. So in other words, you're not going to have secondhand smoking, like a cigarette. That's interesting. Again, kind of wish it was stated, but it's implied. And then what we also get here is that we learn that when planetary governors are approached by the human representatives, they're sitting there at a campfire smoking this pipe to immerse themselves and fully empathize with the human and bring themselves down to that level. It's kind of like kneeling for a child when you're talking to them. You want to talk to them at eye level to show that we're equals, not talk down on them. Interesting. After being a space marine, the path upwards in the chapter is based on their deeds and wisdom. This is the path they believe Jagatai and the Emperor set out for humanity. The chapter views Jagatai as a great warrior, but a decent philosopher. This is where the chapter views him as unbalanced. Much to the anger of the White Scars, they instead view the Emperor and all of his deeds as pure balance, and Jagatai as a lesson to their younger Marines, what happens when one runs wild in both body and spirit. Usually spending their time wandering, aiding the populace, and studying art and poetry at their monasteries, these Space Marines are more individualistic than others. Interesting. So here we learn that this chapter does not really care for Jagatai too much, but they'll actually use him as like a lesson, saying, look at what happens when you just run rampant. Great warrior, but not really great philosopher. Whereas the Emperor, they view him as the greatest in both regards. That's interesting. So from here we can see why the White Scars and many of the White Scars' descendants do not like this chapter. They view Jagatai's sense of honor and his code as unbalanced and unwise. Which you can probably imagine would make a lot of these guys very, very mad. Especially to them when honor is so sacred. And this is the Space Marine chapter that questions their honor and saying, we think your honor is just skewed, if not misplaced. That's interesting. When it comes time to elect a new chapter master, that being from death, or from him leading the chapter for 500 years. Okay, so here we learn something new. They elect a new chapter master every 500 years or every time they die. That's new. A grand council is made between all those who have achieved successful planetary governorship. From here, the council, in the span of a few months to a full year, travel amongst the candidates' planets and view the planet's success based on what it was when the candidate took over. Here they do a full-depth survey from quality of life to output of produce, and even time people spend on art and poetry. The final and most important detail is how many Space Marines the planet they ruled over produced since they ruled. This would naturally make some people think that whoever owned the homeworld of Orichala would be the easiest candidate, but no, it's actually the hardest, as Orichala has the most extensive surveys done on it. The chapter can trace it down to the very first time the planet was inhabited by them, with their original chapter master, and have that to compare against the current owner against the hundreds of previous owners of Orichala. Easily, the candidate can be looked as inferior, especially to someone who may have had a golden age 2,000 years ago. This is why the current chapter master is viewed with such distinction, as he successfully passed 4 times as candidate for chapter master while being the owner of Orichala, a very rare feat indeed. Typically, a person is chosen as chapter master and given sole ownership of Orichala, and after 500 years they typically lose and go back to owning a different planet while the new chapter master takes Orichala. Wow, that is a lot of lore dumping. That's really in-depth, but that is just a lot of lore dumping right there, where it's just, how do they do it? How do they go in? What do they do? What are they looking at? That's interesting. So if you're a planetary governor of a world that's been owned before by other planetary governors, they're comparing you to the past. They're comparing you from all the way up to when they found the planet to all the way up to now, you as the current owner. Have you done better than the predecessors? Have you done better than everyone else? And their current chapter master, who apparently has no fucking name, he's passed 4 times while owning their capital which is stated as to be very, very rare. That's interesting. Due to the way the chapter operates, they have been slow to expand and even slower to grow. Many of their Space Marines are still in training, and those who aren't sometimes set themselves away from the chapter, ignoring the call to battle as they need to find spiritual balance. Wandering warriors with long katanas plague their planets, each with noble stories and battle songs, but as a chapter, they rely more on their human inhabitants than any other. When in contact with other chapters, they are typically seen as pseudo-overlords, and when in contact with Custodes, they are viewed with annoyance, as the members of the chapter frequently wish to waste Custodes' times engaging in battles of philosophy. Now, while Custodes do engage in philosophy battles, it really gets in the way when they are on a mission. Interesting. So now we learn a little bit about how other people view them, and that they're a bit annoying. So, wow. This has a lot of details in it, and this could easily be viewed as like a real chapter that could actually exist in Warhammer 40k, because again, when I do homebrew chapters, this is what I'm looking for, is a lot of details. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of pictures, which is a big downside to me, because like it doesn't explain why one pauldron is pink and the other one is white. Well, I'm sorry, not pink, bright red. And it also doesn't show me like what would their Thunderhawks look like, what would their ships look like, or Dreadnoughts look like based on this color scheme. But I'm assuming it would just be the right side would always be the bright red. We also learned why it is it's roughly 3,000 Astartes. It ties it all in together, and why they have such an Astra Militarum force accompanying them at all times. We learned that it could actually be more than 3,000. So we know that, one, they don't really abide by the Codex Astartes, even though it's not stated. But we can learn that there's probably more than 3,000 just because there's wandering people training still even past their adulthood. And we've learned a lot about this chapter. Something that's interesting about it, though, is the way that they rule and the way that they conduct themselves, the way that they focus so much on raising planets that they actually don't spend a lot of time conquering planets. This is really interesting because to me this strikes a lot of like Ultramarines, but instead they're like some sort of samurai Ultramarines, despite being Jagatai Khan's stock. And from here we learned an extreme amount of detail about how they conduct their voting and how they discuss which candidate they will vote for chapter master. But we have very little detail in like how do they conduct themselves in battle. How do they organize their squads? How do they do that? Like, not much detail there. So, for me, this is a solid, like, 7 out of 10. You may think that's a little harsh. You may say, what? Freezer, this chapter you made is amazing. I could easily see it in the Warhammer 40k setting. Yes, but for me, it just doesn't have enough detail. Like, there's no history here. There's no history of their deeds. There's no name for their chapter master. There's no, I would say, culture put into it. Like there's no filling in those gaps, like what exactly do the girls do at their monasteries to maintain it? What about the Mechanicus? Does the Mechanicus play a role? After all, these guys own Hive City, so why is the Mechanicus not mentioned at all? So again, to me, this is another 7 out of 10, just like the Brothers of Flesh from the other homebrew that I did, that I personally made. There is a lot of good details in here, and I could easily see this being a real chapter based on the location, based on the lore that has been given. This could actually exist. The Veiled region is a very difficult region to exist in, so it would make sense that a chapter stuck there would have to become independent and self-sufficient. But it's kind of weird, though, that they rely so much on Imperial Guardsmen and only 100,000 when it should be higher. Those numbers should be cranked up, especially against Necrons. Necrons are no joke. But besides that, that's been Freer 700. Please comment down below what you guys think about this chapter. You guys may say, you know, this isn't exactly samurai Buddhist enough. This may not be exactly like what you were going for. It's still interesting, but it's not quite what you were going for. Or you guys may comment and say, wow, I would love to play this chapter. This chapter is actually cool. Can I take it? And my answer is, go ahead. Be my guest. The chapters I make, you guys are more than willing to take into your little Warhammer workshops and show them and show everyone the cool lore. The file of this is posted in my Discord, so you guys can look at my Discord and go, oh, here's a Google Doc that I could just copy and paste into my own work and improve upon it in areas that I view needs improvement. Besides that, this has been Freedom 700. I am out. Peace. I hope you guys enjoy. I hope you guys more or less take notes and go, when I design a homebrew chapter, I should put this much detail in. This is like 8 pages. And to me, it's still not enough. To me, there's still rooms for improvement. It's not a 10 out of 10. For you guys may say, you know what? This is a 10 out of 10 for me. I'm going to do a chapter just like this, 8 pages exactly, where some of it is just super in detail and some of it's just not in detail. And send it to me. And I'll do a video just like this one, where I review it and go, is this good? Is this lore accurate? Does this make sense in a Warhammer 40k setting? And I'll tell you straight up whether it does or not. Besides that, see you guys next time. As always, like, comment, subscribe, and peace.